The main focus of our talk yesterday was how new criticism brought about a change in the way we view a text. Before it, under biographical criticism and historical criticism, we used to see a text as part of outside, something outside it. Means either it was the author who determined the meaning of the text, or it was the historical, socio-cultural background of the society which gave a meaning to the text. But when new criticism began, we started thinking about text in a different way. Now people started realizing that a text is a complete unit in itself. Means you need not to go outside the text to understand its meanings. It further meant that an author was not important. What was important was the product. So now we are moving from a kind of father figure to the text to the text itself, from a parental figure to the child itself, from determining factors to the product itself. Okay, okay. Now we move further, and there are certain keywords which you must understand while trying to understand the background of this text. For instance, we are talking about against paraphrase. New criticism was against paraphrasing. And now, what is paraphrasing? Paraphrasing means paraphrasing means that you take a poem, for instance, you give its prose rendering, you try to describe it in as simple words as you can. This is paraphrasing. You usually do it in your classrooms. You are asked to critically appreciate a poem, and then you write the meaning of the poem, what we call meaning within the text, within the quote. Meaning usually stands for the prose rendering, the giving shape in prose to the poetical lines. Okay, this is paraphrase. Now, new criticism was against paraphrasing. Why? As you must have already felt that when we paraphrase something, we try to keep it simple. We try to substitute meaning of words into something which is easily understandable. Now, what really happens during paraphrasing is that you are replacing something complex and critical into something simplistic and one-dimensional. Okay, so when you reduce a complex poem into the so-called meaning of the poem by giving it prose rendering, by making it simple, by putting it in alternative words, what you are doing is you are reducing the soul of the poem to a very simple meaning. So this is paraphrasing. And now new critics were against paraphrasing, which they called as summative. Summative is giving summary. Now summary can never be equal to the real thing, the real text. Summary is always a superficial meaning which we try to impose from outside the text. It is called reductionist reading. Paraphrasing was called reductionist reading. Reductionist is made from reducing. रिड्यूसिंग का मतलब होता है किसी चीज को कम करना, उसके महत्व को कम करना. तो जब हम पोएट्री को पैराफ्रेजिंग करते हैं पोएट्री की या उसकी समरी देते हैं तो हम क्या कर रहे हैं? हम सिर्फ आउटर मीनिंग को रख रहे हैं और जो उसका सोल है, तो सोल क्या है पोएट्री का? उसकी कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी, उसकी मल्टी डायमेंशनैलिटी. सो वी आर रिड्यूसिंग द मल्टी डायमेंशनैलिटी ऑफ अ पोएम इनटू a homogeneous, into coherent, into simplistic structure. Right? So, new critics were against paraphrasing. They said that this is a kind of murder of a poem or murder of a text because you are substituting the complexity of a thing, the multidimensionality of a thing, into something which is very simple and which is superficial and which is without any complexity in it. So, the famous phrase, the heresy of paraphrase. Heresy means doing something against religion. Okay? Heresy means doing something against religion. So, paraphrasing is basically violation of the spirit of the text. So the heresy of paraphrase means that you are really violating the spirit of a poem, because the spirit of a poem is a complex thing. And when you reduce to a simplistic thing, you are robbing it of its richness. You are robbing it of its diversity. Okay. Now the next important phrase is against impressionism. Now, let us try to understand what is impressionism. Impressionism is made from impression. Impression means when you see something or when you read something, you form an impression. And on the basis of that impression, you try to evaluate a person or a thing or a text. Now, what is wrong in evaluation? Evaluating a person on the basis of impression? Because, you know, there are two views. One view says that when you read a poem, you are affected by the poem. Certain emotions are aroused in you because of the imagery and because of the impulse within the poem. But if you solely depend on your impressions of the poem, what is happening is you are giving undue advantage to the subjectivity. You know, for instance, I read a poem and I like it because it somehow appeals to me. You read a poem, you don't like it because it doesn't appeal to your experiences. Now, who which judgment is to be accepted? Whether my judgment is to be accepted, who likes this poem because it appeals to me without any objective criteria, or the judgment of a person who reads the poem and instinctively doesn't like it because somehow it doesn't appeal to his own experiences, his own understanding of the world. So what happens is that when you rely upon impression of a text, it becomes too subjective. And and the kind of objective criterion which these new critics demanded is not possible within those subjective impressions. Okay, so new criticism was against impressionism because it considered impressionism as a subjective domain which varies from person to person, which is dependent upon certain criterion which are not objectively determined. Okay, तो फिर तो ऐसा ही हो जाएगा ना कि हमें मान लीजिए बच्चों को जज करना है, तो हम अपने इंप्रेशन के हिसाब से भाई ये बच्चा मुझे अच्छा लगता है, चलिए इसके हाईएस्ट नंबर दे देते हैं, ये बच्चा मुझे अच्छा नहीं लगता, मैं इसको कम नंबर दे देता हूँ। हम ऐसा नहीं करते ना, हम क्या करते हैं, एक ऑब्जेक्टिव क्राइटेरिया डिटरमाइन करते हैं, सभी के एग्जाम्स होंगे। ओके, और उसमें सभी बच्चे एक ऑब्जेक्टिव क्राइटेरिया की स्टैंडर्ड्स पर जज किए। So impressionism is not a good yardstick to evaluate things. That's why these new critics were against impressionism. So Brooks believed that a poem should not be criticized on the basis of its effect on the reader. He says that a detailed description of my emotional state or reading certain works has little to do with indicating to an interested reader what the work is and how the parts of it are related. Because impressionism is not objective criteria. It's not based on objective criteria. It's not based on something which can be assessed by different people in different circumstances. So, according to Brooks, the evaluation of a poem or a text must be based upon certain criterion. And these criterions should be related to the intrinsic unity within the text. They should not be borrowed from the outside. They should explain how different parts of the text are related. Okay, so W.K. Wimsett and Monroe C. Beardsley, in their famous essay, The Affective Fallacy, talk about this thing. Affective is made from affectation. Affectation means impressionism. Fallacy is, of course, something wrong. So, affective fallacy means a criteria which gives emphasis to affectations or impressions is false. This was, of course, the name of the famous essay written by them. Now, Brooks argues, though irony, paradox, ambiguity, and other rhetorical and poetic devices of his or her art, the poet works constantly to resist any reduction of the poem to a paraphrasable core. This was what we were earlier talking about. You know, the stylistic devices within a poem like irony. I hope you understand what irony is. Irony means a difference between what seems and what is. The surface meaning and the real meaning. the dichotomy between what is said and what is implied. This is irony. Paradox means putting two opposite things together, and ultimately these opposite things are found to be true. Ambiguity means having more than one meaning, and other rhetorical and poetic devices of his art. The poet resists any reduction of the poem to a paraphrasal form. What Brooks says is that irony, paradox, ambiguity, etc., give a complexity to the poem. This complexity is part of the poem and it is different from the outer simplicity to which people try to convert it into, favoring the presentation of conflicting facets of theme and patterns of resolved stresses. So when the poem contains different elements within its texture, there are some elements which conflict with each other and they make a pattern, they make a structure. This pattern and this structure make for the strength of a poem. And when you try to reduce a poem to a paraphrasable one, or you try to make it into a simple image, you are basically taking away that part of the poem which is its strength. Okay? So now we have a famous text written by I.A. Richards, which is the Principles of Literary Criticism and Practical Criticism. These are two texts written by him. Now we come to fault lines. We have discussed about new criticism, what are its salient features, what it tries to do to the text, how it tries to understand the text. Okay. Now, new criticism had certain weaknesses also, because I again repeat, new criticism put text onto the center of discussion and it neglected everything which it considered outside of the text. Basically, new criticism is about primacy of a text. That text is all sufficient, all complete in itself. You do not need anything outside of it to understand the meaning of the text. This is what was postulated by new criticism, right? Okay. Now, with time, certain assumptions of new criticism were criticized by other critics. What were the weaknesses of new criticism? New criticism isolated the text. First thing, new criticism considered that the text is a complete entity, that it has no relation with the outside world. Now, can we accept it? Of course, we can justify to a certain extent that text should be read as in itself, and it should not be read in reference to something which is perhaps not relevant. To a certain extent, it can be justified. But new criticism made text into a kind of fetish. It considered text as a standalone phenomenon, and now with time we understand that text is not a standalone phenomenon. Text is part of life outside the classroom, or outside, outside its own structure. Socio-cultural, historical factors are as important to understand a text as text itself. Okay, so the first weakness which was noted about new criticism was that it isolated the text and excluded historical and biographical context. It did not give due importance to historical and biographical context. The author is dead, author is not important, okay. Historical background of the text is not important, okay. So it means a text is without any moorings, without any roots. A text is complete in itself and has no relation to anything outside. Brooks' approach to criticism was flawed for being overly narrow and for disabling any and all attempts to relate literary study to political, social, and cultural issues and debates. Of course, this was bound to happen because new criticism put text onto the center, so it neglected the context. And of course, people were going to say that how can you understand a text without its context? How can you say that this text has generated itself in isolation and it has no relation whatever to the world outside? Brooks rebuffed the accusations that new criticism has an anti-historical thrust and a neglect of context, He insisted that he was not excluding context because the poem possesses organic unity, and it is possible to derive a historical and biographical context from the language the poet. When Clint Brooks was criticized on this account, he tried to defend himself. He said that when I say that biography of the poet is not important, history of the text is not important, I'm not saying that our text is, is something which is immune to all influences. He says, since I'm emphasizing the language of the text, language in itself is historical. So he says, I'm just not negating all historical elements which is going to make it the text. Now, what is a paradox? Since the title of the essay is about paradox, let us try to understand what paradox is. Paradox is a statement which seems contradictory. See, the word is seems. The word is not is, rather the word is seems contradictory, incongruous, but found to be true. Paradox is a statement which seems to be contradictory. देखने में हमें लगता है कि विरोधाभास है, लेकिन वो विरोधाभास जब हम उस टेक्स्ट को, उस लाइन को, स्टेटमेंट को समझने की कोशिश करते हैं तो विरोधाभास नहीं पाया जाता। Paradox is a statement which seems to contain two contradictory elements, two opposite elements, but in ultimate analysis, these opposite elements are reconciled. So we have a detailed definition of paradox. A paradox is a seemingly true situation, true statement or group of statements that lead to a contradiction or situation which seem to defy logic or intuition. When initially we hear that statement or we read the sentence, we think that there is an opposition. And a sudden feeling is there how it can be true, how both things can be true, right? But when we analyze the statement deeply or we think about it, we find that this is true. Of course, we will take examples also. Typically, however, quoted paradoxical statements do not imply a real contradiction. जब हम विरोधाभास को दर्शाते हुए सेंटेंसेस को देखते हैं तो हमें शुरू में लगता है कि हाँ विरोधाभास है, लेकिन जब हम ध्यान से पढ़ते हैं, उसके ऊपर रिफ्लेक्ट करते हैं, उसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट को समझने की कोशिश करते हैं, तो हमें लगता है कि विरोधाभास नहीं है, there is no real contradiction. And the puzzling results can be rectified by demonstrating that one or more of the premises themselves are not really true and play on words, faulty or cannot all be true together. Literary and other artistic uses of paradoxes imply no contradiction and may be used to describe situations that are irony. Remember, when we use paradoxes in literature or perception, it's more close to irony or multidimensionality, multiple meanings of a thing. Sometimes the term paradox is used for situations that are merely surprising. कई बार हम विरोधाभास को ऐसी स्थितियों के लिए भी यूज करते हैं जो सिर्फ आश्चर्यजनक, जिसमें अपोजिशन नहीं है, सिर्फ वो सरप्राइज है। पैराडॉक्स इज टू एस्पेक्ट्स, वन इज वंडर, जब हम किसी पैराडॉक्स को पढ़ते हैं, सुनते हैं तो आश्चर्य की भावना आती है। आयरनी आयरनी मीन्स व्हाट सीम्स बट इट इज नॉट, सरफेस मीनिंग और रियल मीनिंग में अंतर होना, ये आयरनी होती है। There is a difference between paradox and oxymoron. Oxymoron क्या होता है? Oxymoron में हम सिंपली दो अपोजिट फ्रेजेस को साथ साथ रखते हैं और उनके बीच में अपोजिशन होता है। पैराडॉक्स में हम दो अपोजिट चीजों को साथ साथ तो रखते हैं बट दे आर जस्टिफाइड। जब हम रिफ्लेक्ट करते हैं देयर इज फाउंड नो अपोजिशन विद इन दोस टू। ये पैराडॉक्स और ऑक्सीमोरन में फर्क है। ऑक्सीमोरन ब्लैक व्हाइट, ठीक है। पैराडॉक्स, those who are away from me or those who stand away from me are closest to me, जैसे जीसस क्राइस्ट की स्टेटमेंट कि जो भीड़ में सबसे दूर खड़े हैं वो मेरे सबसे नजदीक है। ये स्टेटमेंट पैराडॉक्स है। कैसे? हमें हम जब सुनते हैं हमें लगता है कि अपोजिशन है, भाई जो पीछे खड़ा है, दूर खड़ा है, वो पास कैसे हो सकता है। लेकिन जब हम रिफ्लेक्ट करते हैं रिलीजियस कॉन्टेक्स्ट को तो हमें समझ में आता है कि हाँ, उसका कहने का मतलब ये है कि जो व्यक्ति धक्का नहीं मारता है या जबरदस्ती पास नहीं जाना चाहता है, वो भगवान के सबसे क्लोज होता है, राइट? हम इसको जस्टिफाई कर सकते हैं। ओके, तो पैराडॉक्स और ऑक्सीमोरन में हमको समझ में आ गया। ऑक्सीमोरन का मतलब सिंपली अपोजिट शब्दों को साथ साथ रखना। पैराडॉक्स का मतलब अपोजिशन होना, लेकिन when you think about it that opposition is not found to be true, that is paradox। और ये स्टेटमेंट होती है यूजुअली पैराडॉक्स के अंदर। द पैराडॉक्स एज a literary device has been defined as an anomalous juxtaposition of incongruous ideas for the sake of strange exposition or unorthodox insight. Usually, it takes place in a situation which is startling or religious, okay, and it puts two ideas or two things together which are supposed to opposite to each other. Okay, so just read it, and we can just take 2 or 3 examples which are there. There is a statement by Oscar Wilde: I can resist anything except temptation। मैं टेम्पटेशन को छोड़कर बाकी सब चीजों को रजिस्ट कर सकता हूँ। नाउ टेम्पटेशन, हम रजिस्ट किसको करते हैं? टेम्पटेशन को रजिस्ट करते हैं। देयर इज अ कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन, बट व्हेन यू थिंक अबाउट इट देयर इज नो कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन आल्सो, बिकॉज द ऑथर इज एक्सेप्टिंग दैट ही इज वीक। ऐसे ही हमारे पास पैराडाइज लॉस्ट जॉन मिल्टन के अंदर एक स्टेटमेंट आती है that the fire of hell emits no light but darkness visible। हेल के अंदर, नरक के अंदर जो आग जल रही है उससे रोशनी दर्शित नहीं होती है, सिर्फ अंधेरा दर्शित होता है। नो लाइट बट डार्कनेस विजिबल। नाउ हाउ कैन डार्कनेस बिकम विजिबल? देयर सीम्स टू बी a contradiction in this paradox, and this is a paradoxical statement that the light makes no sorry the, the fires of hell emit no light but make darkness visible। So there is a position, लाइट तो है नहीं तो डार्कनेस विजिबल कैसे होगा? डार्कनेस कैसे विजिबल हो सकती है? विजिबिलिटी और डार्कनेस के अंदर अपोजिशन है। But when we think about it, we feel that we are considering, a situation of a hell in which light stands for mercy of God, light stands for compassion, light stands for worthiness of people, and its absence shows that the people in hell are without any mercy from God. So we can justify it in this way. We can understand it within the context of the religion. Similarly, in Hamlet, play by William Shakespeare, there is a statement by Hamlet: though this is madness, yet there is method in it। मैडनेस है लेकिन मेथड है। अगर मेथड है, मेथड मतलब स्ट्रक्चर है, मेथड मतलब उसके आइडियाज हैं। अगर मेथड है तो मैडनेस नहीं है, क्योंकि मैडनेस क्या होता है? मैडनेस केओटिक होता है, इट्स अ केओटिक काइंड ऑफ बिहेवियर। And if there is a method, it means it's not madness. If you are doing something consciously, you are not mad, because madness is unconscious behavior. So how it can be that this is madness as well as there is a method? There is some kind of conscious understanding of what a person is doing. So again, it's a paradox, because there is an opposition between madness, which stands for chaos, which stands for something which is unconscious, and method, which stands for conscious behavior. So there is an opposition between, and this opposition gives it the form of a paradox. But when you reflect about it in the context of the play, you see that what the author is saying is true also, because Hamlet became mad because of certain, certain things which happened to him, or rather, he tends to be mad at certain times. So this is pretense, which creates a method within his method. Of course, there is an opposition as well as an explanation for that opposition within this, right? So let us try to repeat what we have tried to understand today. We have talked about paraphrasing, the heresy of paraphrasing, which is a very significant statement, that when you try to convert a complex text into A simple meaning, you are actually sacrificing the soul of the text. अगर आप एक टेक्स्ट को जो कि बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स स्ट्रक्चर होता है जिसके अंदर, उसको सिंपलिस्टिक बनाने की कोशिश करते, उसकी पैराफ्रेजिंग करते, उसको प्रोज में तब्दील करने की कोशिश करते, तो आप उस टेक्स्ट की आत्मा को नष्ट कर रहे हैं। क्योंकि उसकी आत्मा क्या है? उसकी कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी, उसकी मल्टी डायमेंशनैलिटी, उसके अंदर जो अपोजिशन ऑफ मीनिंग्स होते हैं, वो अपोजिशन ऑफ मीनिंग्स ही उस टेक्स्ट को एक यूनिकनेस देते हैं। एंड व्हेन यू take away this complexity, this multidimensionality, this multiplicity within the text, you are robbing it of its soul. This is one thing we talked about. Second thing we talked about was what is paradox. Paradox is a statement which contains contradictory meanings within it. अगर हम आसान भाषा में कहें तो एक पैराडॉक्स क्या होता है? पैराडॉक्स एक ऐसी स्टेटमेंट होती है जिसमें विरोधाभास होता है। विरोधाभास सत्य ही होता है। अगर आप डीपली एनालाइज करें उस टेक्स्ट को या उस स्टेटमेंट को, तो पाते हैं आप इसमें विरोधाभास नहीं, क्योंकि उसका कॉन्टेक्स्ट उसको ये पोजीशन देता है और इसका एक्सप्लेनेशन देता है, राइट? We have talked about oxymoron. Oxymoron is simply putting of opposite words together, okay, as compared to paradox, which is complex and which ultimately shows there is no opposition. Okay, with this understanding, with the kind of things we have tried to understand today and yesterday, we will go to the text, okay, on the next lecture. I think you have received the text. Text सभी के पास, आप लोगों के पास पहुंच गया है? टेक्स्ट पहुंच गया आप लोगों के पास? हाँ, ठीक है। इसको टेक्स्ट को अब हम टेक्स्ट की रीडिंग शुरू करेंगे, ओके? और जो आज मैंने आपको बताया है इसका नोट्स में आपके गूगल क्लासरूम के ऊपर भेज देता हूँ, इसको पढ़ लेना। जहाँ आपको कोई दिक्कत आए हम इसको नेक्स्ट डिस्कस करें, राइट? ओके?
यस सर।
आज के बारे में कोई डाउट? वी हैव जस्ट 2 or 3 minutes लेफ्ट। क्विकली अगर कोई क्वेश्चन है तो आप पूछ सकते हैं। एनीबॉडी? कोई क्वेश्चन, कोई डाउट आज के बारे में? कोई डाउट, कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं?
सर, I did not understand that the heresy of paraphrase. That term I did not understand.
हेरेसी कहते हैं वॉयलेशन को। हेरेसी का मतलब किसी चीज का उल्लंघन करना, ठीक है? हेरेसी शब्द ज्यादातर हम धार्मिक उल्लंघनों के लिए यूज करते हैं। जैसे हम कहते हैं भाई किसी ने मंदिर के अंदर कोई नीच डाल दिया या किसी ने भगवान की बुराई कर दी, हम उसको हेरेसी बोलते हैं। हेरेसी का मीनिंग समझ गए?
yes,
इस चीज को वॉयलेट करना, किसी की सेंक्टिटी को वॉयलेट करना। पैराफ्रेजिंग का मीनिंग क्या है? जब हम कविता को, हम पद्य को गद्य के रूप में ढालने की कोशिश करते, ठीक है? हम कहते हैं भाई आपके पास एक पोएम है, आपने उसको पढ़ा, फिर हम कहते हैं उसकी पैराफ्रेजिंग कीजिए। तो यूजुअली क्या करते हैं हम उसके अंदर उसको हम सिंपली प्रोज के रूप में लिखना शुरू कर देते हैं। भाई इस लाइन में पोइट ये कहता है, अगली लाइन में पोइट ये कहता है, अगली लाइन पोइट ये कहता है। ये पैराफ्रेजिंग, ठीक है? अब दोनों फ्रेजेस को हम मिला दें, हेरेसी और पैराफ्रेज, तो क्या मीनिंग है? इसका मीनिंग ये हो गया कि जब हम पोएम के कॉम्प्लेक्स स्ट्रक्चर को सिंप्लीफाई करने की कोशिश करते हैं, प्रोज में तब्दील करके या आसान भाषा में तब्दील करके, तो हम उसकी आत्मा को नष्ट कर रहे हैं। क्योंकि कविता क्या है?
उसकी कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी,
हाँ,
क्योंकि
उसकी मल्टीप्लिसिटी। एक पोएम के अंदर मल्टीपल मीनिंग्स होते हैं, ठीक है? उसके अंदर मल्टीपल डायमेंशनल्स होते हैं, विभिन्न सतहें होती हैं पोएम के अंदर। When we try to make out a simple meaning of that poem, what we are doing is we are reducing that complexity to a simple core. हम उसका कोर देने की कोशिश करते हैं, इसका सार क्या है? अब एक सार तो होता नहीं है, सार तो बहुत से होते हैं पोएम के अंदर, उसके डिफरेंट सेंटर्स होते हैं। हम एक सेंटर को चूज करते हैं, बाकी पॉसिबिलिटीज को रिजेक्ट करते हैं, राइट? So we are just giving it a simple form and reduce its complexity by making it a simple thing. But poem is never a simple thing. इट हैज मल्टीपल वॉइसेस विद इन इट। इसको हम पॉलीफोनिक स्ट्रक्चर कहते हैं, जिसके अंदर डिफरेंट वॉइसेस आपस में स्ट्राइक करती हैं। ये हेरेसी ऑफ पैराफ्रेज। ओके, सो हैव अ गुड डे।
Yes,
थैंक
sir.
यू। ओके, थैंक
Sir,
यू। बताइए एनीबडी।
sir, the affective fallacy.
हाँ, अफेक्टिव। अफेक्टिव का मतलब असर डालना, अफेक्ट करना किसी चीज को, और फैलेसी का मीनिंग झूठ बोलना। ठीक है, इसका मतलब ये है सिंपल वर्ड्स में कि अगर हम किसी पॉइंट को पढ़ते हैं और वो पोएम हमारे ऊपर क्या इंप्रेशन देती है, उसके आधार पर हम उस पोएम को इवेल्युएट करते हैं, तो ये फॉल्स डिसीज। कारण क्यों? क्योंकि हो सकता है मेरे को पोएम पसंद आ जाए, मैं कहूँ कि बहुत अच्छी पोएम है,
Okay.
दूसरे रीडर को पसंद ना आए, वो कहीं पोएम अच्छी नहीं है, तो जजमेंट तो फिर नहीं हो पाया ना। तो अफेक्ट इफेक्ट करना, किसी चीज के ऊपर असर डालना मीन्स जो रीडर रिस्पॉन्स है, दैट्स नॉट अ प्रॉपर गाइड टू ascertain the value of a poem. Whether a poem is a good or bad, it should be dependent upon some objective
Based on
criterion and
certain
not on
criteria.
how it affects the reader. पोएम अच्छी है बुरी है, उसके लिए कोई आधार होना चाहिए, ना कि ये पढ़ने वाले पर कैसा असर डाल दे। क्योंकि हमारी इमोशन सब्जेक्टिव होती हैं, राइट। हमारी लाइकिंग्स और डिसलाइकिंग सब्जेक्टिव होती हैं, तो दैट कैन नेवर बी एन ऑब्जेक्टिव पॉइंट। ये अफेक्टिव है।
Okay. Thank you,
ओके,
sir.
ओके, थैंक यू, हैव अ गुड डे, बाय।